everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It's so nice to see a full house. The topic of this discussion is very dear to me, as it is to many people in South Asia. The word partition, even 75 years later, reverberates. It has meaning, it is a war, it is a wound, it conjures powerful imagery. The purpose of this discussion is to look at the means of recording, remembering, preserving, and understanding the legacy of one of the most catastrophic events of South Asian history. So I want to start by asking a simple question about beginning. You both have your own ways to preserve stories of partition. Navdeep, through the texts, your translation of your grandfather's text, particularly Khoon de Soile, which was first written in 48, and you translated it recently as Hymns of Blood. And Rajeev, through the writing of this book based on interviews that you conducted over decades in India and Pakistan. So my question is, what drew you to the event of partition, both of you, and why did you begin to write about it?
Well, at the outset, I would like to make it very clear that I am not one of the sufferers of Pakistan, of partition, nor my family, because I belong to Kanpur, which was hardly affected by partition. And I had nothing to do with partition. But often I used to go to Pakistan. And lot many people used to tell me that you go there and bring some photographs of my house, and I haven't been there. Like Shah Rukh Khan's grandmother-in-law, Gauri Khan's nani, she always used to tell me कि बेटा पुत्र तू जा रहा है ना लायलपुर, एक बार लायलपुर से मुझे फोटो ला दे मेरे घर के वकीला दी गली की. So all lot many people, so when I went there, and similarly vice versa, the people who had been uprooted from here and they went to Pakistan. So I got really emotional. I got emotionally carried away that suddenly people are displaced. With 1 hour's notice, people are told that you leave the house, otherwise you will be killed. You leave this country. Where to go, they don't know. So, look at it. Suppose if somebody comes to you tomorrow and said, ki bhago, just run away from here. And where? Ye nahi pata. You have to run away from here. Where you have to go? What is your destination? Which country are you planning to go? You haven't got any idea. So look at the trauma which these people face. So that inspired me to write this book. That's why I've written this book. And this is about all real partition stories. I met a number of families in Pakistan who had been uprooted from India and they got settled in Pakistan. The trauma which they suffered. Similarly, the people who had come from there here, including Dr. Manmohan Singh, who is the Prime Minister, his story is also there. And this Haryar Khan Sahib's story, who was supposed to be Nawab Sabha Bhopal. Later on he became Foreign Secretary in Pakistan and Chairman of the Pakistan Cricket Board. So lot many of these stories which they themselves had told me. And now then these people were in their 80s, 90s and they narrated the whole story. So that's why I've written this book. Each and every person mentioned in this book is, true and they're real and there's nothing, no concoction, no fiction, nothing.
Well, unlike what Rajeev said, where his accounts are 100% based on actual narratives, I translated this novel, which was first published in February 1948, and it has a pretty interesting story. My grandfather in the foreword writes that actually this is more history than fiction. And if I were to say that 80% of the events narrated here are based on people that I met, I saw firsthand, or accounts heard from people who had experienced this firsthand. So for me, taking up this novel and its sequel was important not only because we were celebrating 75 years of independence, and in the whole atmosphere of celebration, I wanted that we should also pay some heed to the price that was paid for the independence. But also because when I first read this book, my grandfather, who was a staunch nationalist, he went to jail during the independence struggle. He was present in Jallianwala Bagh when the massacre happened and survived to write a long poem, says that quite dramatically, that as the rest of the country is getting ready to celebrate the 15th of August, I have to close my eyes and think that what an accursed year this 1947 was. And how I wish this year, for which we waited for 200 years, hadn't come, because today I have to step back and think, we lost our humanity, and was it worth gaining independence if we were to lose our humanity? And somewhere, for me, when I read those lines, it struck a chord that we take all of the celebrations of independence for granted, but do we pay enough thought to this other dimension, or are we increasingly removed from it, forgetting about it? But just a couple of words about my grandfather. He was born in 1897.
Perhaps you should also tell them his name.
Nanak Singh, also called the father of the Punjabi novel, because in his lifetime he wrote a staggering 59 books, including 38 novels. He got virtually no formal education, was orphaned at the age of 10, self-taught, born as Hansraj, came under the influence of a Sikh priest in Peshawar, of all places, converted to Sikhism and became Nanak Singh. And moved to Amritsar when he was still in his teens, when he was 18 or 19, and spent the rest of his life pretty much in Amritsar. These two books, Hymns in Blood, and the second one, the sequel that I'm working on, Agadi Khed, which is a game of fire, I think are remarkable accounts. This one talks about an idyllic little village near Rawalpindi in the Pothohar area, where Hindus, Sikhs, and Muslims had lived in harmony for generations. And overnight, virtually everything was upended, and they became refugees. And he writes about life in that village, how they celebrated Lohri and Diwali and Eid together in that village. And so it really gives you a remarkable texture of life in undivided rural Punjab. And the second book is set entirely in Amritsar, and for the same period, the first 8 months of 1947, you have one book which traces life in Pakistan currently, and the Exodus, and the second one talks almost entirely of what happened in Amritsar. To me, these were powerful stories, and there was a lot of stuff that I didn't know. But just one final thought was that, in a sense, I became an accidental translator. We'd been pretty complacent in our assuming that, yes, grandfather was a famous writer. But he died when I was 12. And I think it wasn't until I was a first secretary in our embassy in Washington in 1997, when his centenary was being celebrated, and I.K. Gujral, as a Punjabi and as a great fan of his novels, was the Prime Minister. And so Gujral Sahab released a postage stamp and a first day cover and all of that in a function at 7RCR. And overseas, the Indian diaspora started celebrating his centenary, his legacy. So I would get invited to events in Chicago and Detroit and Miami and Los Angeles for no reason except that I was his grandson. And somewhere in conversations with women in particular, the penny dropped, because these ladies would come and say, "Beta, assi te Punjabi unna de nawalan to sikhi. We learned Punjabi by reading his novels, or we learned Punjabi so that we could read his novels." And I felt that maybe we have an obligation to spread that word in a wider context.
And I think you've done that through your translations, because it's made available text we wouldn't ordinarily have read as on such a large basis. Like the two of you, I am also a scholar of partition. And the one probably main thing I encounter from people who have survived this event is when you go to interview them, they say, "Why do you want to dig up old wounds? Why are you asking about this?" And you can see that perhaps these are stories that have never been uttered before. So in your opinion, is partition still relevant? Should we still be talking about it 75 years later?
Well, the scars can never be forgotten, but over a period of time, generations after generations, they're forgetting it. Particularly younger generation on both the sides, they are not aware of those kind of things. But, I mean, for first family to second family to third family, third generation, they kept telling its stories. So they have got very vivid memories of these things. And as a journalist, as a minister, as a politician, as a cricket administrator, I regularly used to go to Pakistan. So there I got to meet these people. And then they narrated their story in a very elaborate manner. Then, all these stories I picked up from there and then selected ones. Like this Taimur's Nani's story. Taimur is an educationist there. He is a very scholar in Lahore, so he had taken me to his house. So when I was taking round of his house, a big bungalow he has got in cantonment. So from one room I saw one old lady is calling me like this. So I went to her. I said, please tell me what. He said, beta tu kahan se aaya? India se aaya. मैंने कहा India. So her accent was altogether different, like a Parsi accent. So मैं तैमूर का नानी है, तो मेरा एक काम कर देगा, next time कब इंडिया से आएगा? तो मैंने कहा कि maybe after 2 months, because there's a India-Pakistan series again, so I may come after 2 months. मेरे लिए थोड़ा बॉम्बे का मिट्टी ला देगा, क्योंकि मरने के पहले मैं अपने माथे में बॉम्बे का मिट्टी लगाना चाहती हूँ. मैं उधर कभी गई नहीं है. इसके नाना के साथ शादी करके आई कम इन 1946 or so. After that, never went to India. So I want to touch the soil of Bombay before dying. So I was really moved. So when I came, I spoke to Taimur's mother. He said she's my mother. She had come in 46. She had fallen in love. She's from famous Choksi family, freedom fighter family from Bombay. And then, she had come here, and after that, she got married to my father. She came to Peshawar. After that, she could never go. So I don't know where from I should arrange this thing, this soil of Bombay. So Sunil Sethi was with me. He had also come to watch that match. So I had taken Sunil Sethi with me to Taimur's house. So I spoke to him. She said, I can do one thing. I can gift her Indian flag, because he was carrying Indian flag to be shown in the stadium. So he gifted her that flag. After 10 years, Taimur told me, what's happening in my house? I said, whenever there is a match between India and Pakistan, Nani is always on wheelchair and holding Indian flag, and rest of the family supporting Pakistan, she is supporting India. So that kind of feeling was there even after 68 years.
No, but it's actually quite complicated to feel allegiance to the land you live in, but still hold dear the land you left behind. There is no easy story of partition.
Yeah, definitely. And one more thing which I would like to add here. She wouldn't have uttered a single word of Marathi. But when Sunil Sethi told her that I also live in same area, Malabar, you also used to live in Malabar, she started talking to him in fluent Marathi. And she was so thrilled, listening Marathi. So that kind of feeling is there. But, I think the generation must know about this tragedy. Official figure suggests that 1.2 million people had been assassinated and 4 million people had been displaced. And unofficial figure, they say 2 million people had been killed. So it was the biggest genocide of the world. So I think people should know about it. So, it should not happen again. That's the message. This kind of gory incident, this kind of thing should not be repeated. So generations after generations should learn this thing from partition. That's why we are giving all these stories.
Navdeep, I want to speak to you about how there's actually no one way to tell a partition story. We, unfortunately, over the last 75 years, we've become very complacent in thinking about partition as a story of pure violence. And that's a singular lens. When we think of partition, we think of the trains, we think of the bodies. But partition is a very complex landscape, and violence is one part of that landscape. The one thing Nanak Singh does in his novels, Khuni Vaisakhi poem or Khoon de Soile, is encourage us to think of other ways to look at partition. So I was wondering whether you could speak to the notion of hope that is in the book and how it is a very uncommon way to remember partition.
Yeah, there is hope and there is a healing. And I think my grandfather saw himself as a social reformer through his novels. His role model was Munshi Premchand, whose books he had written when he was read when he was in jail in Lahore, and he thought this is what he wanted to do. He wanted to try and change society through his books. And so whether it is the plot that he writes, whether it's the characters that he brings forth, there's an underlying subliminal message for the readers of what you should be or you shouldn't be. In some of his books, he uses characters like a religious figure from a Gurdwara, a Granthi, who's actually the evil guy. And he's trying to tell you, beware of these religious charlatans. In this book, because this book is set in Potohar, and it talks about all of the violence that was inflicted on the Hindu and Sikh communities and the forced exodus. And yet, when you read the book, one of the standout characters is a Muslim landlord, Chaudhry Fazl Karim, who's so dedicated. First they say, don't go anywhere. We will save you with our lives. The mobs will have to kill us first before anyone can touch you. And yet when they see that the mobs are becoming larger and larger and even they would be defenseless, then they keep urging these families that please leave, you're not safe here. And finally they put together like a group of 15 or 20 young men from the village, young Muslim men from the village, who will escort this group to safety of a refugee camp from where they can be taken across into India. And you know, the fact that a Muslim family is willing to sacrifice its home, its fortune, even its sons, comes through so vividly that it militates against notions to paint the partition as black and white. And the message that you read when you finish the book is, terrible things happened. The level of brutality was unprecedented. But there were also these islands of humanity that continued to survive and were true to what they believed in. And I think that's where, responding to your point, that's where maybe some of our emotional healing can come, that we don't look at the black and whites. We try to take out some of the positives that he's throwing at us. And he does the same thing in the sequel to this, which is quite interesting because that book is set in Amritsar. A lot of the violence was actually inflicted by Hindus and Sikhs on the Muslims to force them to leave Amritsar. And he doesn't pull any punches on that either. And there's this, if I can take the liberty, there's this dramatic scene where the principal protagonist, a guy called Satnam Singh, hears noises coming from the neighborhood and thinks, this must be the Muslims rampaging in revenge attacks to what the Sikhs did yesterday. And in his mind is an image of Muslims with fez caps and daggers drawn out to attack. And what he sees instead is Sikhs in black turbans and naked kirpans heading towards a group of unarmed people. So he forces you to confront with a reality that the brutality was bilateral. It was both ways. And you need to accept it so that you stop this othering of the other.
No, to take a leaf out of his conversation, what he narrated, I would like to endorse his views. Actually, if you go by the data, 50% Muslims were killed and 50% Hindu and Sikhs were killed. So both people from both the sides suffered, and agony. I mean, if you go through the agony of both the sides, I think it provides a thought of communal harmony also, because there are thousands of cases in which Muslims, they saved Hindu families, Sikh families, and Sikh and Hindus, they saved Muslim families. Like Manmohan Singh's his grandfather was killed by Muslims youth, but his grandmother was saved by a Muslim family who could reach to his uncle. So these things, one should not forget how the people, they have been saved, they saved each other. There are not many good people. So the good and bad people both were in the society.
And just actually to build on that point, these are actually stories we never hear when we are growing up. मतलब जब मैंने पार्टीशन के बारे में स्कूल में पढ़ा था, ये कहानियाँ नहीं थी. So you have done extensive work speaking to people over decades in India and Pakistan. What do you think is the benefit of oral testimony, oral history? Can it counter a national narrative? Can it help us become more empathetic?
Definitely, one thing I pointed out was flagged off is communal harmony, which is developed. Secondly, when people get to know about true stories, real stories, then only they understand how the sufferings, how people suffered, and then they will think that we should never repeat these kind of things. Society should not be divided.
Navdeep, you mentioned something earlier where you said this novel read more like history than fiction. And there is a small part in the foreword that I would like for you to read where Nanak Singh also comments on this.
Each of my grandfather's novels were, there was a longish foreword where he would outline some interesting circumstances that would draw you into the story. This one is different because it's really long, and he wanted us to understand the historical, political context of what was going on in Punjab in terms of the politics of that period in the run-up to 1947 and why things fell apart like they did. And he does say something very interesting. He says, it's easy to blame this on the Brits, but we knew them for 200 years. We knew what they were like. We knew that the divide and rule policy is something that they've been practicing for all of this time. What happened to us? Why did we lose our senses? So he doesn't want you to escape responsibility by pinning the blame on somebody else, and kind of points out how fragile our humanity is, that it can be swept away so easily. And he starts off on the second page of the book. He wants us to know why he's writing this book. And I'll just read out a page from his foreword. But what lies behind this compulsion of mine? Maybe it was this picture imprinted in my eyes, one that will continue to shine bright till the day that the shadow of death arrives to cast a pall around it. An image of my beautiful and vibrant Punjab, which I have not just seen with my eyes, but also experienced with my soul. Much of my childhood and youth were spent in a milieu where the Muslim and non-Muslim communities lived in complete harmony, where they didn't just live as peaceful neighbors, but were ready to sacrifice their lives for their neighbor's sake, where every plate of food and glass of water was shared. Pieces of that picture lie shattered around me today, and this novel is an attempt to show my readers some of those pieces. But this book isn't just a novel. It is a reflection of the ache in my heart, the scream from the very pits of my stomach, the wail from the very depths of my soul. In writing this book, my pen has relied on the tears flowing from my eyes as much as it has on the ink from the ink pot. Everyone around me speaks of the numbers. How many Sikhs have been massacred? How many Hindus have been killed? How many Muslims have been slaughtered? But for this unfortunate writer, the biggest casualty was humanity itself. How does it matter if the victim had the long hair of the Sikh, the shikha of the Hindu, or the circumcision of the Muslim? The blood coursing through their veins is the same color of red. The tears flowing from their eyes have the same salt. Try as I might, I haven't been able to discern any difference in the grief-stricken wails of a Hindu, a Sikh, or a Muslim mother as she cradles the lifeless body of her son.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I have to ask, because when we read your stories, I feel like they are as much about the past as they are about the present. And I want to know, because you've done this work for so many decades now, going across India and Pakistan, there are stories of different kinds of people. Do you see any reflection of the present in these stories? And is there anything in your research that when you were writing about it struck you as something that we don't commonly associate with partition?
Well, definitely those days were altogether different. There was no economic development. People's problems were different, and this thing was going on, the feud between the two countries. So, relating with present context is little difficult. But sufferings, if you remember those sufferings, if you get into that nostalgia, then only you will realize that how painful was the whole this thing. and it sends a message cut across, the religious lines, cut across other, caste lines and nationhood, that people should not, break that Lakshman Rekha where they start killing each other just for the sake of having a separate nation. This should not happen. And there are other problems also, like in this, there is a story about one Babuji, and he used to be my neighbor, one doctor family who was in All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Dr. Kumar and his wife Rani Kumar. So one day he called me that my father, he wants to meet you. So I went to meet him. He was all alone there. He must be 85-year-old. And he said, Beta, I have come to know that you have been regularly going to Pakistan. So I said, yes. So can you do one favor to me? I said, what? So you know Nawaz Sharif and Sahibaz Sharif? I said, I know. He said, I have got a work. I used to live in Chide Bazaar or in Lahore. So just find out whether that area is still intact or demolitions have taken place, new houses have come up. So I said, okay, I'll find out. I said, what's the reason? No, I will, I won't tell you the reason. When I insisted, then he said, I was very rich when I came from there. Every day I used to get rent of 5,000 rupees. I had so many properties. In 47, he had 5,000 rupees per day rent he used to receive. So, and when this violence started, communal riots started, so people advised me that you go for 15 days or 1 month out of Lahore, and after that you will come back and everything will be yours. So I, came back. I came to Vrindavan with some money and some clothes. Didn't take anything from the house because I was sure that I would be back in month's time. And then partition took place, and I was not able to go to Lahore. So I have got a treasure hidden under a wall, which will be worth 200 crores today also. So all gold and diamonds, everything is there. And that cannot be unearthed unless the whole house is demolished, because wall is very thick. So if you could talk to somebody, Nawaz Sharif or someone, that half they can take and half if they give me, then my work will be done. So if you help me, I said, uncle, it's not possible, how can they, it's enemy property, so it cannot be given. He said, you try. So I spoke to my friend, who was the son of Yawar, who is the son of Chief Secretary of Punjab. So he went around in that area and he phoned me. He said, these houses are with the downtrodden people, so nothing has been demolished, houses are completely intact, and it's a very dense area, thickly populated area. So nothing has been demolished. So I told him, then again, then he was very happy. He said, okay, then you go ahead. I said, what was the house number? He said, house number, I won't tell you. Because if I tell you the house in exact address, then they will take away. And they won't give me anything. So unless you make it sure that I get half of the treasure, then only I will give you. So, and then I spoke to Chief Secretary. He said, it's impossible. It cannot be done. Please tell him that. And he also didn't ask for house number or something. So that treasure is still there, the khajana is still there, and Babuji passed away last year at the age of 89. And till then he was driving a scooter, two-wheeler he was driving. Those days he was, millionaire and still, suffered. So the message which the new generation, the future generation, they should learn that, dividing the society, thinking on communal lines, ultimately is not going to help.
It's almost prophetic, right? It serves as evidence. So my last question before we get to audience questions is, how do you both see the legacy of partition 75 years later in the context of the three countries it impacted?
Look, let me go back to the diplomat's hat that I was wearing for 36 years and say, at one level, partition is a reality. It's also clear that the two parts that were partitioned, the course of those countries and our relationship with those countries has been dramatically different. Today we count Bangladesh as one of our close friends. We cooperate, we're building shared infrastructure, we're doing all sorts of things. With Pakistan, it's almost a frozen relationship that thaws briefly at the edges for a moment or two, and then rapidly freezes back. Um, this is a reality that we have to deal with, and occasionally it's interesting to see either people from a part of the political spectrum speak about Akhand Bharat and reclaiming by force if necessary. Or there was this really interesting example of when this book was being discussed at the Nehru Center in London a few months back. And surprise, surprise, there was a group of Sikhs who described themselves as the Potohar Association of UK. And they had come for the event, and there was real longing. So they wanted me to put in again my diplomat's hat and say, what do you think are the chances of reunification? But this was more from an emotional, nostalgic, rather than an Akhand Bharat perspective.
Yes.
So you can see that at different ends of the spectrum, there are people who are still invested in that thought. But just one final thing, which to me, I don't have an answer for it, but it intrigues me, is that in a sense, the people of Punjab paid the biggest price for partition. They also were at the front line during the 1948, 65, 71 wars. Our own village, which is about 4 or 5 miles from the border, was a military encampment. It had become a chhaoni, and there were tanks over there. And yet, there seems to be a greater willingness in Punjab to reconcile and to leave behind the trauma of the past than I see in states which are much further away and which suffered much less. I don't have an answer for this paradox that the hatred seems to grow proportionately to the distance from the border.
It's very similar to the first generation of survivors. Ma'am, maybe after they finish, we can get to questions. Thank you. Yes, I want to hear what you have to say, because essentially what I think are stories like the ones that you have written, or stories that other oral historians record, are what will pave the way for any kind of reconciliation. That word is a very big word when it comes to India and Pakistan. And as a very young person, I don't know when I will see that reconciliation. So what do you see as the legacy of partition now?
Well, I mean, there must be many people in the audience who would have been to Pakistan several times.
I don't think so. I think it's a
Many
privilege
journalists
actually.
and intellectuals, during 2004 to 2008, many people, they would have been there. So, and one thing they must have realized, that people-to-people relationship is still excellent. If you go there, they will hug you, they will treat you like a own relative, they will, kind of feast they will organize for you can't imagine. So people-to-people relationship, there's no problem. The problem lies with people like them, diplomats. They are the one, who, who make it sure, then the two nations, they never become friendly. That's the problem. Government to government level, always there are problems. Army, defense, these people, they always create. So people to people relationship, if that is encouraged, and the kind of initiatives taken, like once which some NGO had tried their level best, then many people who they wanted to say their birthplace, so some NGO was working, taking old men from here and bringing old men from there. So all the initiatives, if they are taken, some endeavors are done. So I think at least if people are together, then there's a ray of hope that we can have a better relationship. But saying that there will be a Akhand Bharat or unity is impossible now. It cannot be done. I don't subscribe that idea.
So I don't know whether is the diplomats like me at fault, or politicians like Rajeev at fault. Maybe we can do a straw poll on that. but yes, the realities are there.
On that note, I want to lots and lots of questions. Okay, maybe let's take one from the front. Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Wait for the mic.
And maybe actually, because I know this is a partition thing, so everyone wants to tell stories and give comments, but if we can limit it to questions only.
No question. A reason being that, first of all, I am from Amritsar. I am student of your mother. Second thing, what we have tolerated. The thing was, my parents were from Pakistan. The stories which was nurtured by me, I was nurtured by the stories. I will definitely, I listened from my mother in childhood that our appa, what I am today, that is because of that. I write poetry. And I wrote a book on Sade Samya Ne Bhi Dekhya, that is in Punjabi. But all about is about that we must be human before dividing and
Thank you so
divided
much.
to the
Thank you.
religion.
Thank you.
That is relevant. The thing what we were saying, that is today is relevant. Yes, why not? But we tolerated in 90s and before in the partition. We will never want that it should happen again.
Yes.
That is the lesson. That is the message. That is the total thing. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. If you can limit it to questions and not long comments, please. Please go ahead, sir.
सर अंबेडकर साहब ने जो अपनी किताब है पार्टीशन, उस किताब में उन्होंने लिखा था कि जो मुसलमान हैं उन्होंने पश्चिम बंगाल की साइड में रेफरेंस से लिखा था कि अगर कंप्लीट ट्रांसफ़र ऑफ जनसंख्या हो जाए, मतलब हिंदू उधर से उधर आ जाए, मुसलमान यहाँ से आ जाएं, ये अंबेडकर साहब की थी बात। तो आपकी इसमें विचार बताइए। हम अंबेडकर की बात बोल रहे हैं।
देखिए, ये अंबेडकर साहब ने ऐसे तो नहीं कहा जैसे आप बता रहे हो, कि कुछ लोग ये बोलते हैं कि टोटल ट्रांसफ़र ऑफ पॉपुलेशन हो जाता तो उससे कोई सोल्यूशन निकल आता। पाकिस्तान में तो ज़्यादा 99% वही है कि हमारे झगड़े नहीं है। उन्होंने शिया सुन्नी निकाल लिया, उन्होंने अहमदी निकाल लिया, तो ये झगड़े टकराव तो चलते रहते जहाँ सोसाइटी है। इसलिए वो कोई सोल्यूशन नहीं था। वो एक बात थी जो उन्होंने रखी थी कि एक सेगमेंट ऑफ सोसाइटी के लिए एक अलग से होना चाहिए, वो बात अलग थी। लेकिन मुझे नहीं लगता कि इस तरह से अम्बेडकर साहब ने कहा। और अभी जो सूरी साहब कह रहे थे ना कि पंजाब के लोगों ने, बंगाल के लोगों ने इतना सफ़र किया। जो अब मुजीबुर रहमान की वो जो ऑटोबायोग्राफी है जो उन्होंने लिखी है, विच वॉज पब्लिश्ड बाय शेख हसीना, उसका भी एक चैप्टर इस किताब में मैंने दिया है। आप पढ़ो उसको, देखो दोनों तरफ से किस तरह से लोग सफ़र किए। तो इसकी बात नहीं है
सर। आप
एक क्वेश्चन बस।
हाँ, यू कैन मीट हिम आफ्टर। यस, गो अहेड सर। या
हाँ,
yeah, the gentleman right here.
gentleman looking like VK Singh.
Oh, thank you. Sir, Rajeev sir, I find it difficult to digest since my childhood that we are welcoming to successors of General Dyer, but not to people from across the border. So, how to forgive but not forget? So, I find it a bit difficult to digest.
General Dyer?
From Britain, I find it difficult that we have always been welcoming to successors of General Dyer. Basically, is it about economics or?
He will.
Okay.
You know, one is, let's not get into the very slippery slope of generalizations, right? I would take objection to the term successors of General Dyer because I don't think that's the way to describe any country or any community. Beyond that, you know, what we've learned is that in our very complicated relationship with Pakistan, it will take two to tango. We are today stuck in that groove of reciprocity. क्योंकि वो हमें वीज़ा नहीं देते, हम उनको नहीं देते, वो हमारे साथ ट्रेड नहीं करते, हम उनके साथ नहीं करते. At the end of the day, I think it is more on the side of Pakistan to make a determination and for the country and particularly its army to make that determination that their well-being and welfare lies in peace with India. So long as you have an army which takes 25% of the country's budget and its raison d'etre is to have this hostility with India, I don't see us doing anything that will make a large difference in terms of the relationship with Pakistan. So I think there are issues that have to be addressed within Pakistan that we can't control. And so maybe time will settle it. Maybe changes in Pakistan itself will settle it. Who knows?
Yes.
Maybe the lady in the pink and green who's waiting.
Thank you so much for taking my question. Yesterday I was at your big bookstall and I was trying to read the wonderful book about Jallianwala Bagh written by your grandfather. I couldn't make myself to go through the pages. It is so heart-wrenching. And the kind of atrocities that have been inflicted during partition and otherwise are something which moves you to the, I mean, it's difficult to go through them and read them at all. So my question is, how do you make yourself to write it and read it?
Well,
Very difficult,
Yeah, I understand.
not easy. And
No,
you've
it's
gone
not.
ahead and
You
seen
are-
those. But I think more and more books like these probably is the only answer
Thank
to
you.
be able to
Even-
know about these instances. Yes,
Now you realize
yes.
that if you are getting emotionally carried away,
Let them
even
just
while
answer.
reading the book, that means, look, think of those people who actually suffered. This is what this message we want to send across.
take a mic, take a mic.
Your father having written these remarkable books documenting those times, and of course coming from that stock with that kind of sensitivity which would be innate in you, and the diplomat's hat. So when you see around, one thing of course sure, two for twinning, and also the awam, whenever we go to Pakistan, awam wants. That's the one thing you hear across. Awam chahta hai. So you pointed out diplomat and politician, and the third factor which just came out is the army in Pakistan. So as a diplomat and as a son of the great literature, you would be knowing that it's possible to thaw. So अभी recently भी अगर पाकिस्तान की तरफ से thawing की बात आती है तो अगले दिन 2 दिन के बाद हमें we want to take a very guarded view. So it is like we know we can do it, but still we are not doing it. So as a diplomat, how do you respond to that? Thank you.
You know, you've actually given me an easy example of the statements that came out 2 days back. Nawaz Sharif's interview with an Arabic newspaper, Al Arabiya, where he said, we've learned the lessons of the past, we've learned from the mistakes of the past, and we're ready to move on. And then his own office issued a series of statements with but Kashmir, but Article 370, but this. So as I said, they have to come, we can't force peace on them. So we have to accept, we have to be realists in this. I've been in that trade too long to allow my emotions to dictate to me in this particular case. So yes, I'm very happy to talk peace, but I can't do it their job for them. They have to come to that as a society, as a nation. They have to come to that collective realization that they are hurting their own interests. And the results are there to be seen, you know, where their economy stands and where the rest of the country stands.
Younger generation is also suffering. We can't play cricket with each other.
Okay, one last question, perhaps from the back. Maybe this gentleman right here. Yeah, sir, go ahead.
राजीव जी, मेरे प्रश्न सीधा आपसे है। राजनीतिक स्तर पर और कूटनीतिक स्तर पर कुछ ऐसा हो जाए कि दरवाजे खुल जाएं, जैसे बर्लिन में हुआ करता था किसी ज़माने, जब बर्लिन की दीवार खिंच गई थी, तो साल में 10-15 दिन ऐसे होते थे जब दीवारें खुल जाती थी, दीवार के दरवाजे जो होते वो खुल जाते थे। कोई ऐसा कुछ मसला बनाइए, कुछ बात बने।
देखिए, ये तो आपको माहौल पहले यहाँ बनाना पड़ेगा और उधर वालों को उधर बनाना पड़ेगा। जब वोट दोनों तरफ इसी आधार पे लिए जा रहे हैं कि झगड़े पे और दुश्मनी पे, तो इससे नहीं जम बताया ना कि हम क्रिकेट की टीम हाँ, क्रिकेट टीम भी इधर नहीं भेज पाते, उधर नहीं भेजाते। तो ये जो ड्राफ्ट बनाते हैं दोनों तरफ डिप्लोमेट्स, पॉलिटिशियंस को उसी ड्राफ्ट के हिसाब से जाना पड़ता। तो इसलिए जो है, ये बीच में एक दौर आया था, मैं तो कहूँगा कि दैट वाज अ गोल्डन एरा ऑफ इंडो पाक रिलेशंस when 2004 cricket series had taken place. After that, look at the kind of stories you must have read कि साहब वहाँ गए तो दुकानदार ने पैसे नहीं लिए, उन्होंने अपने घर पे ठहराया खाने, मोबाइल फ़ोन चालू हो गए थे, ट्रेड डेलीगेशन आते थे, बिजनेस डेलीगेशन, जर्नलिस्ट डेलीगेशन, साफ वहाँ आप तो गए हो उसमें है, कितना शुरू हो गया था अगर वो चलता रहता. बट अगेन I mean 2009 when this Mumbai incident took place, after that everything came to an end. So there has something must, so unless there are pressure groups on both the sides. Once Nawaz Sharif had told, he had suggested me, I had gone to interview, I used to do a program called Rubaru. So long back he is the Prime Minister, so I asked him how the relationship can be improved. He is a businessman, so he gave an idea. He said कि ऐसा करो कि जिस चीज़ का प्रोडक्शन पाकिस्तान में वो फैक्ट्री लगाओ जिसका रॉ मटेरियल इंडिया में मिलता हो, और इंडिया में वो फैक्ट्री लगाओ जिसका रॉ मटेरियल पाकिस्तान में मिलता है. तो बिजनेसमैन ही अपनी सरकारों को पकड़े रहेंगे, वे झगड़ा मत करो हैं, और ये जो है उससे काम बन जाएगा. कल ये सुजुकी हम खरीदते हैं 2 लाख में, आपके यहाँ मारुति कार जो हम वहाँ से लाएँ तो हमें टैक्स नहीं लगेगा, हम 50,000 में ला सकते, हमारा भी बड़ा फ़ायदा है यहाँ पे. लेकिन जो है मुसीबत ये है कि दोनों तरफ से होने नहीं देते इस्टेब्लिशमेंट. बेसिकली दे आर रिस्पॉन्सिबल.
On that note, we will conclude this session. Both writers will be signing their books at the back, and you can ask them more questions then. Thank you so much for joining us.